Hi, I'm Umbreon Libris. I want to share with you the process and the results of my 3 most recent Pokemon redesigns. Not counting the new 151, that's a separate series. I do these redesigns on the last Saturday of every month. I ask you for ideas, of course I bring my own, and we work them out together on a live stream. But I know that live streams aren't for everyone. Not everyone has 3 to 6 hours free on a Saturday, and even from everyone that does show up, most people can't stick around for the entire thing, so I like to do these recap videos. Today I'm going to show you my redesigns of Eiscue, ARCEUS, and CONCALDER. Normally I would talk about them in the order that they happened, but I think you're probably the most interested in ARCEUS, so I'm going to save that one for last for that sweet delayed gratification. But don't worry, the other two are very cool too, especially Eiscue. You know, because of the ice. But before we jump into the process, let's do a quick recap of what I felt needed to change about it and what needed to stay the same. Eiscue's whole theme is that it has an awkwardly small head, and so it uses a big block of ice to kind of hide itself behind and get that confidence boost. So that's definitely staying, and it'll still be a penguin, even though I don't think anyone's quite figured out yet what a penguin is doing in England. But hey, we still don't know why there was a Mexican luchador in France either, so these things happen. But the ice block feels disproportionately big. It doesn't feel like the body would be very stable under all of that ice, and Eiscue would have some terrible neck pain. And the design of the body feels way too simple, way too toned down for a modern Pokemon, which is a trend with a big chunk of Gen 8 Pokemon, but I still think that that's something we can work on. I started out by trying a variety of different shapes for the head ice. I wanted it to still be cute, but present a fierce exterior when it goes into battle. Indigo, my wife, gave the idea of replacing the ice head with a whole igloo bunker, so I wanted to try it out even though I wasn't convinced that it could work. And it was actually very well received by the stream chat, but in the end the consensus was to keep the cubic ice head. We'll come back to the igloo later, but for now, let's work on the base body. I wanted to give it a more noticeable pattern on the belly and also put something around the neck, like the fluffy collar of a winter jacket, to help make the transition from the body to the ice head. I also tried to give it fluffy cuffs on the wings, but that was too much, so instead I stuck with just a band of color. I wasn't in the mood to spend too much time getting the perspective to look right on that head cube, so I resorted to Photoshop's 3D capabilities, a technique I really need to remember to use again. In case you're wondering, the beak is meant to look like a popsicle, and the little cube on the tip of the hair just add a little extra charm, but we decided that on the no ice face form, it made sense for the hair to be a bit floppy without all of that ice to keep it rigid and upright. And that was pretty much it. Ice face and no ice face Eiscue, a friendly penguin with major self-confidence issues, using a big block of ice to literally put on a brave face. But we're not quite done with Eiscue because enough viewers liked the igloo that we decided to use it to give our Eiscue a Gigantamax form. Entirely new forms and designs is not something I normally do on these streams, but this was a good way to use the igloo idea. I nearly forgot to give Gigantamax Eiscue its hair, but we turned it into a snowflake-shaped antenna so we can watch some TV in there while drinking hot cocoa. I don't know how a permanent igloo bunker would interact with Eiscue's ability or what kind of Gigamax move it would have, but I'll leave that to the game designers. Next up is CONCALDER, a construction elder that wields concrete. The whole family is not super well loved, but judging by the responses I got when asking for ideas, most people don't really agree on what is so bad about them. There's a lot of elements that different people think are off-putting. Overly humanoid Pokemon is a common one that I definitely stand behind. But for CONCALDER specifically, and to a degree Timber and Garter as well, you also have their small legs and waist in relation to the huge chest and arms, the fleshy growths on their heads that kind of resemble hair, the choice to give them a clown nose, and their gross bulging veins.
Yeah.
For me, personally, despite all of these weird elements, the overall design actually works pretty well.
Wrong.
But I think the bulging veins are the only one that's intrinsic to the concept of the family. I thought you were gonna say it again.
Wrong.
And the top-heavy proportions are probably pretty important for it to be recognizable as CONCALDER. The rest, we can definitely change.
Like the veins! Change the veins!
Gano, one of my patrons and the person who was pushing for this redesign the most, suggested we base it on beavers. At first I wasn't sold on the idea, but thinking about beavers' relationship with construction and how iconic the North American beaver is, it's even the New York State animal. Add to that how timber starts with a squared log, beaver dams are made of wood, modern hydroelectric dams are made of concrete. It all came together perfectly. It was also Gano who suggested switching Conkeldurr's cracked concrete pillars for large concrete blocks, kind of like cinder blocks, something more angular and interesting. Obviously, it gets a beaver tail, and because the tail would be the perfect tool to smooth out the concrete it lays, I added a big vein on it that would look like a handle as a reference to tools used for smoothing out concrete. Meanwhile, the veins on the chest are shaped to suggest the form of pectoral and abdominal muscles, and to keep the area from being too empty. I had to reposition one of the concrete blocks to make sure that the tail would be visible, and I really should have remembered to use that 3D trick here. It would have saved me a lot of time. As I traced the final lines, I also made the fingers pointier so that they would look less humanoid and more beaver-like. The hard hat really sells the construction motif, but because I don't like Pokemon that wear clothes, I made it into a concrete hat. So it's less a clothing item and more a protective layer made from Conkeldurr's own concrete. The dark pattern on the hands and feet resemble beaver colors, but also reference construction gloves and boots. I realized this ended up being a pretty similar approach to what I did with Sock and Throw, in that I took a humanoid fighting type and redesigned it by adding animal elements. But there's a reason overly humanoid Pokemon don't sit well with a lot of people, so I'm happy with it. Although it is very different from the original Conkeldurr to the point that it doesn't fit with the existing Timber and Girder at all. So I worked backwards to very quickly, very roughly, explore what those two Pokemon might look like, because I didn't want to be streaming for 8 hours like I did with the Clink line. I think these are improvements, but they're also imperfect, so I encourage you to draw your own version of Beaver, Timber, and Girder. Give them your own spin. And finally, we can look at ARCEUS. This one was a challenge just to figure out what direction to take it in. Its design and lore pull from creation stories from a lot of different cultures, but I don't think that's communicated in the design itself. The wheel around its middle is the most clear reference. At least it seems to reference the Wheel of Dharma from Buddhism, as well as halos from all kinds of religious iconography, and maybe a few other symbols as well. And it's also, I think, the only element from the original ARCEUS design that needs to stay. We can change its shape and such, but it still needs to have a wheel for it to be ARCEUS. I also find that ARCEUS doesn't really look like anything, which I'm guessing was on purpose, but it ends up being too abstract, and so it doesn't carry enough symbolism in its design to convey its importance. As a result, it doesn't really look holy enough. Its design is too awkward to convey that omnipotence. I also find all 4 of the main Gen 4 legendaries very ugly, with the exception of Origin Giratina. So basically, I wanted to keep the idea of ARCEUS, but throw out almost everything about its original design to come up with something fresh. And for that, I turned to the ARCEUS placeholder sprite that was leaked along with the Diamond and Pearl beta last year. At least I think it was last year. This is clearly unfinished, and we can't know for sure whether ARCEUS was ever intended to really look like this, or if it's just a placeholder. But it's no surprise that it captured our imaginations, because this looks much more like a manifestation of the original spirits than the final ARCEUS does. And I was really inspired by the interpretations that Rachel Briggs did of the ARCEUS variants of different types. Let me show you what I sketched in preparation for the stream. I tried a number of different angles that we'll explore more in a moment, but this one in the corner was my vision for what ARCEUS should look like. Seen directly from the front, we have a shapeless dark mass, with a simple but striking face in the middle, surrounded by the wheel, taking the very obvious role of a halo. This image was so compelling to me that I let it guide most of my choices from here on. Every design you will see is part concrete and part abstract, meant to imply a creature that can transition between the original spirit and an earthly manifestation. And for that avatar, for that earthly form, I wanted to give ARCEUS a stronger basis on a specific animal. My first thought was a bison, but that felt too North American a choice for a Japanese region. The bear was a much better choice, because the Ainu people, the native people of Hokkaido, where Sinnoh is based, consider themselves descended from bears. It's not their creation story, but it's still associated with their origin. I still tried other animals that have been associated with creation or the origin of life in various cultures, including a bird, which does reference the Ainu creation myth, but ultimately settled on the bear. I tried a lot of different designs for the face. I wasn't sure how bear-like the face should look, but I did know I wanted a single, all-seeing eye kind of design, and I settled on a single large eye with 2 smaller dots on the sides. I'll explain that choice in a moment when I'm drawing it from the front. Before that, I also tried a lot of different designs for the wheel. I wanted it to have slots for each of the plates, so I needed a design with the right number of spokes and sections to allow either 16 slots, referring to the number of plates that existed at the time that ARCEUS was introduced, or 18 slots for the modern type system, in which case the base ARCEUS would be typeless instead of normal. I considered placing it around the midsection, same as the original ARCEUS, but decided it would look better at the neck, where it can function better as a halo, but would also be a little bit smaller and not poke into the ground. Which is also part of the reason we settled on this design for the wheel, with 2 halves of 3 spokes each and 3 plates per spoke. This way there's no spoke going directly downward. And now that I have the face drawn from the front, I can explain that the eye is meant to look similar to the eyes of the Unknown, since Unknown and ARCEUS have some mysterious connection. We don't know for sure what it is, but we know there is one. The 2 dots on the sides are another callback to OG ARCEUS, which also has dots below its eyes, but their main role is to make the design look more approachable, a bit more natural, because they're placed roughly where you would expect the eyes of a bear to be as well. So it still has the single all-seeing eye in the middle of the forehead without looking too unnerving. The feet are pointy as a callback to the original ARCEUS. This ARCEUS felt like the perfect realization of my vision. I think it manages to look much more powerful, much more holy than the official ARCEUS design, without compromising that multicultural influence that is so important to ARCEUS's lore. The second pose that I'm drawing shows that ARCEUS can rear onto its hind legs like an actual bear, but it also demonstrates what ARCEUS would look like with one of its plates in place. Rather than a simple color change, the formless mass turns into a representation of that pure type. We picked water as a fairly basic type for this example, so you can imagine what it would look like holding other plates. Actually, I encourage you to draw your own takes of this too. So there you have it. I'm super happy with how all 3 or 8 of these redesigns turned out, but I would love to hear what you thought of them too. And if you want to draw your own takes on what timber and girder should look like in order to evolve into this CONCALDER, or what other ARCEUS types should look like, or even what Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina should look like to better fit with this ARCEUS, please do and send them to me. I would be ecstatic to see your drawings. I don't normally do this, so I hope you'll forgive me this one time, but I want to remind you that you can support my work through Patreon. You pledge a small monthly contribution as little as $1, and you get access to our private community Discord. You get to see the final art of these redesigns before anyone else. And at higher contribution levels, you can get your name in the credits, you can hang out with me on voice chat during art streams, and even commission me. I have a good feeling about this year, at least on the Pokemon side of things, so I hope that you'll consider supporting me. But either way, thank you for watching. And a huge thank you to those of you who already support me on Patreon, especially luxury patron Ethan from Chicago. I'll see you in the next chapter.